More than likely, Jesus did not say what Matthew has him saying in today's gospel during a single sermon. You see, Matthew wrote decades after Jesus died. He may have seen Jesus in passing as a child, but more than likely, all of the events in the gospel were known to Matthew through second and third hand accounts only. So Matthew took a few different sources: the Gospel of Mark, the Q document, collections of sayings, and the accounts of elders of his community, and wove them together into a comprehensive gospel. Some of the material had a logical place within the text, but other pieces he just wanted to squeeze in where he could, because he thought it was important that his readers, and those of us today, heard it all. And so, we get these three sayings strung together one after another, but only vaguely related. More than likely, these were things Jesus really said, but at different times and different places throughout his ministry. They're all important to hear, but should be heard on their own, not as one comprehensive thought. So let's start with the last one first. Now, this idea that Jesus came to fulfill the law and the prophets is often taken as justification for hanging the 10 Commandments in prominent locations or taking specific verses from the Torah regarding the proper status of women and LGBTQ plus persons in isolation. But that interpretation is in direct conflict with the gospel lesson. At a time when the prophets were still seen as somewhat lesser scriptures as compared to the Torah, Jesus specifically pointed to them. Now, the prophets, again and again, whether it is Amos, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Micah, Jeremiah, or any of the others, had three basic messages. First, return to the worship of the one God and stop worshiping idols. Now, this is the part that I heard the most growing up. The message of the Bible is to worship God and God alone and be on guard against those who would lead children to worship demons. But the second message was that the worship of the one God was primarily about justice, not ritual. Ritual is there to remind us of who we worship and commit ourselves to that worship. Ritual allows us to set time aside to hear about the one God and the relationship that God has with God's people. But the ritual is made for humanity, not for God. God demands justice, equity, and righteousness as true worship. And that leads to the third message. How you treat one another is the ruler by which your dedication to God will be measured. As Isaiah tells us in our first reading today, fasting and covering oneself in ashes and wearing scratchy sackcloth is meaningless to God. These are human rituals meant to humble us so that we can feel solidarity with those who are hungry, those who do not have access to showers or baths, and those who wear whatever clothing they can, despite being dirty, poorly fitting, or for the wrong season. But what God calls us to is to feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, clothe the naked, and free the oppressed. If we perform rituals but do not turn those rituals into actions, the rituals are meaningless. And so when Jesus points to the law and the prophets and says he came to fulfill both, he is saying he is showing us how to live a righteous life, one in which we truly worship the one God in the way that the one God calls us to, through the right treatment of one another with justice for all. Now, as I said, Matthew just kind of strung these three sayings together, likely from three different sermons given by Jesus throughout his ministry. But Matthew strung these three sayings together to create an ever more clear message. While the last is explicit, the second is a bit less clear. Yes, we should be the light of the world, lamps that are not hidden under bushel baskets. But what this means is not entirely straightforward until the last line. We should perform good works that reflect upon our worship of the one God. Now, this initial ambiguity has been manipulated through the centuries to be just about being loudly Christian, wearing crosses prominently, and trying to convert others, but abusing others in the process. As the last sentence makes clear, however, it is not that we are meant to simply be conspicuously Christian. Rather, we are meant to actually live in the ways of Jesus, And this way of life is meant to draw others to God. We are meant to live our lives as lamps, melting the ice of people's greed, isolationism, and self-centeredness. And this leads to the first phrase. We are meant to be the salt of the earth. We are meant to ensure life is full of flavor and palatable for even the poorest and most disenfranchised of all. And we are meant to not just be the heat, but be the salt that melts the icy divisions that separate us. And so when we leave this place in time of restoration, we are meant to melt that ice that divides us all and live in the fulfillment not of a single commandment in isolation, but the whole of the prophets and the law, to live into radical love.